Good morning and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago, guys. As we kick off this morning's conversations, you know that we are in a season of election, not here in Tobago, but in Trinidad. There is the local government election that is going to be happening in August. And so a lot of things that happen around election time. And one of the things that come into question is the conduct, the ethics, the morals of politicians. And recently, we saw that the code of conduct for um, elections has been released. And so this morning, we're going to chat a bit about that with no other than political scientist and lecturer Bishnu Ragoonauth. So we're talking about campaign issues and adherence to the Code of Ethical Political Conduct for 2023. And this has to do again with the local government elections happening in Trinidad. Good morning, Dr. Ragoonauth, and how are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here once more on your TV station and talking to the population in Tobago.
It's a pleasure to have you as well. So, we're seeing that the local government election is happening on the 14th of August, which is pretty soon. And one of the things that always come into question when we think about election is number one, the freeness and fairness of the election, accessibility, but also the code of ethics and conduct for politicians. So, let's talk a bit about some of the things that we have seen in the past and what we can possibly expect out of the upcoming local government election.
But basically, what we have seen in the past, and in fact, we have seen that the campaigning literally has been one that has deteriorated or had deteriorated significantly, and and because of such deterioration, when we talk about deterioration, where it became personal, where we were talking about mudslinging, and rather than dealing with issues and smear campaigns and all of those things that could be unethical, they in 2014, as a matter of fact, civil society in Trinidad organized and developed a code which they got the major political parties to sign on to, and they did. And not only the political parties in Trinidad, in fact, for the 2017 TAT elections, I was in Tobago. We got the political parties at the to sign on the code there, and again we did so in 2021. In January 2021, we were again in Tobago on your TV station, where we had a public signing where all the political parties signed on to the code. So the code is now being recognized as being something that political parties are taken seriously, or at least should be taken seriously. But the question is simply that there are instances when there are violations to the code, when there are breaches to the code. And when that happens, it is our responsibility to call upon the respective political parties to pull up their socks, so to speak, and to do better, and to make sure that we have a campaign that Trinidad and Tobago could say that, yes, it was a decent campaign, it was an ethical campaign. We know there's a challenge. We know there's a culture in Trinidad and Tobago, a culture of Movilang and Pekong and so on. And whereas that is the culture, we would like to keep the bacchanal out of the politics. We want the politicians to start talking issues. We want these politicians to focus on the critical concerns of the citizenry and not on the personalities of their competitors and so on, as well as to make sure that the country, after the election, remains a country that people are happy with. There's unity in our diversity and those sorts of things. And so we don't want divisiveness, we don't want hatred coming out in a campaign, which is easy to come out in a campaign. And that's where the code of ethical political conduct comes in. And we, the members of the Council for Responsible Political Behavior, has been asked to monitor the adherence to that code.
Right. And in the Council of Responsible Political Behavior, how do you guys really enforce this code? And what are the implications when parties or individuals violate this code?
Now, we have no, remember, I started off by saying that we are a civil society based organization. So we have no power of sanction. We have no control, no punitive measures, nothing like that. What we do and what we can do is simply we could bring to the population's uh, sight the instances when politicians and political parties may have breached the code. Now, bear in mind that we did that that political parties, at least the leadership of the political parties, voluntarily signed on to a code. If they voluntarily signed on to a code, our concern here is simply to show the population, well, look, these are the people who are coming to you and asking you for your vote. If, however, they have signed on to a code and they have now deliberately breached or violated that code, how much trust can you put in them? And you have to be the one who will have to decide that. We cannot tell you to vote for this one or vote for that one. We're not telling you that. We're not going to impose any punitive measure, but we are going to bring to the fore in the public's eye where breaches do occur, and we let the population determine whether those breaches could be deemed to be acceptable to the voting population, and the voting population will then determine the fate of those who breach the code.
Right. And it says that, and under the prohibited conduct section, it states that not use language or act in a way that may, to not use language or act in a way that may provoke violence, intimidate candidates, members of the party's representatives, or supporters of a party or candidate, or invite or encourage or foster hatred, resentment, or any form of violence. What are some other areas that the Council of Responsible Political Behavior is restricting or encouraging candidates to stay clear of?
Well, basically, apart from language, there's a whole thing of how you carry yourself. In fact, your behavior, whether your posters, your banners, all of those things must be decent, must be one that encourages harmony. It must, we do not promote mudslinging, divisiveness. We do not promote using state resources for campaigning on a party level. We, in fact, tell the, and when I say we, the code literally tells the population what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. So you will not, for instance, expect a smear campaign, or we're into this period when we talk about all the different letters of the alphabet, the LGBTQ, and so on. We have people of all uh, beliefs and opinions, and we must respect people. We must respect people's property. So, for instance, a simple thing: do you simply just go and paste up your posters and on your billboards on people's property? Can you just do whatever you want? No, the simple answer is you have to respect that we live in a civil society, and you are going to operate in the context of a civil society and do things not to impact negatively on your neighbors and on your community, but to make sure that at the end of the day, our country remains or sees itself for the better.
Excellent. And so, what we want to look at the elections holistically. And so, how important is this upcoming local government elections for the two key political parties, especially as it relates to the next general elections?
Now, I am to be careful here because when you invited me on the show this morning, you invited me to speak as chairman of the code of the Council for Responsible Political Behavior. I am also a political scientist, which I could speak wearing that hat. But wearing the hat of the chairman of the Council for Responsible Political Behavior, I will not want to talk about political parties and how they're going to, how the election campaign is going to go about there. What I could talk about is simply what the council is about, because I make this point simply because it is not difficult and it is not far fetched for people to simply say, you know, Raghunath is chairman of the council and Raghunath supporting this party or that party or giving. And we want to be fair in how people view the council's actions. I would say this too also in terms of the last week when we got an official complaint to the council. People were calling me and asking me, what's your opinion? And I said, no, it is a matter before the council and I will let the council rule on it. So I am very careful. I don't want to mix rules. So if, for instance, you are telling me that our interview here as chairman of the council is no longer is completed and no longer relevant to the rest of this discussion, then I could probably talk about the politics.
Right, because I want to get into a general discussion on the overall local government election. Because another one of my questions has to do with the idea of having international observers. So I don't know if you could take off your responsible political behavior council hat and kind of get into Professor Dr. Bishnu Ragoonauth and kind of give us an idea of ethically, how do you see the call for international observers and it being denied by the prime minister?
All right. So in a way, we are straddling both positions here, and I'll tell you why. Because within the code, there is reference to the need for international observers and to respect observers. And for all intents and purposes, there's absolutely no challenge in anybody saying that we should have international observers or should have observers. It doesn't necessarily have to be international, it could be local observers, where people who could be deemed to be independent, for instance, could be asked to observe the election and given the responsibility and the authority to do so. So, take for instance, and bear in mind that I have no, I am speaking on behalf of nobody in particular. But if, for instance, you have observers, whether it be national or international, if you have observers, what you are doing is you are telling yourself and you are telling the world at large, I have nothing to hide. You want to come and observe, you could observe. We will give you accreditation to observe. And accreditation would mean that we have to give you certain sorts of responsibilities and permissions and protocols and allowances. So, for instance, an observer could go into a polling station and observe what is happening and how the presiding officer and how the deputy presiding officer are treating and with the voters. But you have to have the protocols in place. You cannot simply say that you just walking in there and don't know that is not allowed. So that's why observers are there. Now, take for instance, in the last within the last week, for instance, we've heard that one political party complained that the Elections and Boundaries Commission denied their candidates. Now, this is something that the observers could report on, and they would now investigate the what were the issues, what were the recommendations, and what actually happened, and they could report on that. And that's where the international or the observers, maybe I should just say observers, that's where the observers would come in and play a key role in how an election is conducted and what how accepted the results at the end of the day will be. So there's no harm in having observers in any election. The harm, however, will come to if, however, we deny observers and other part and causing, in fact, parties which would have contested the election to now make allegations that the election was not free and fair and so forth, and thereupon stain the country's reputation that it cannot hold a free and fair election. So that is the benefit of having observers. Whether or not we will have the observers, however, depends upon those who hold the control of the central government and who will then be able to extend the invitation outside the country if they want international observers, or to give the protocols to those who will be deemed to be observers within the country.
Excellent. And thank you so much for explaining that to us. Hopefully, we can have a general conversation with you as the political scientist soon on the local government election, because there's so many questions to be asked, and so many questions that are being left unanswered. And we're seeing a lot of youth participation taking place this time around as well. But we look forward to having that conversation in the future with you very soon. And again, we want to thank you for coming on to Tobago Updates and just giving us an update on the code of ethical conduct for politicians in the upcoming local government election. Thank you, Dr. Ragunath. Guys, we're going to take a brief break and we'll be back really soon after.
Tobago updates.